picture a massive heavy-duty rope stretched across a muddy field.
Okay.
And on one end, you have the world's governments just desperately pulling with all their might just to fund their day-to-day operations.
Right, just keeping the lights on.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the opposite end, you have these trillion-dollar technology giants pulling just as hard, trying to basically vacuum up all the capital in the world to build out the future of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that is a heavy pull on that rope.
It is. And caught right in the middle of that frayed rope, just getting yanked back and forth, is the everyday consumer. So welcome to the Friday edition of Financial Candy for August 21st to 2026. Today we're looking at a market that is just completely defined by this great capital tug of war. And we're trying to figure out what actually happens when that tension reaches a breaking point.
Well, the sheer physical force on the government side of that rope actually hit a historic milestone earlier this week. The United States national debt officially crossed the $40 trillion mark.
Wow. $40 trillion.
$40 trillion. And to put out the immediate fire and sort of calm the markets, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent attempted to intervene directly in the global bond markets.
Okay, how did he do that?
He announced the government would buy back its own debt. So the mechanical goal there is to step in as an aggressive buyer to artificially boost demand.
Right.
Because when demand for bonds goes up, the yields, the borrowing rates the government has to pay, they theoretically go down.
See, I was looking at the structural math behind that maneuver, and it completely broke my brain. Attempting a buyback at this stage, it feels like trying to empty a flooding basement with a teaspoon.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because the national debt right now is rising by roughly $90,000 every single second, which is just insane. And because of the higher interest rates required to service that massive pile of IOUs, interest payments are now eating up like 20% of all federal tax revenue.
Yeah, it's a huge chunk.
The government is literally spending more money simply paying the interest on its past borrowing than it spends on the entire national defense budget.
Right.
So they attempted this buyback, but market realities took over almost immediately. By Friday, the interest rate on 30-year Treasury bonds had spiked right back up to 5.27%.
And the structural trap you're describing there, it's not strictly an American phenomenon. British public finances are buckling under the exact same gravitational pull right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Official figures published this week show the UK unexpectedly borrowed about $2.4 billion, which is roughly 1.8 billion pounds, just in the month of July.
Wait, unexpectedly? Like they weren't planning on borrowing that much?
Not at all. Official forecasters had actually modeled a 500 million pound surplus for that month.
Oh, wow. So they missed that by a mile.
By a country mile.
Yeah.
Instead, the government is dealing with this multi-billion-dollar miss as they head into a really crucial October budget. Their overall national debt is now nearing 3 trillion pounds, or roughly $4 trillion. So the result is a severe fiscal trap for their new chancellor. They are locked into these rules, requiring them to fund day-to-day spending through tax receipts by the end of the decade, even as, social welfare payments are running significantly higher than last year.
So if the safest borrowers in the world, like the U.S. and U.K. governments, are struggling this much, I mean, that trickles down to everyone else,
Well,
right?
absolutely.
Because if the U.S. Treasury has to pay over 5% to borrow money, that sets the floor for what an everyday listener is going to pay for a mortgage or a car loan.
Exactly. It sets the baseline.
And billionaire investor Ray Dalio actually put out a public warning pointing out that the U.S. is spending about 40% more than it brings in.
Yeah.
He is projecting that if adjustments aren't made to spending and taxes soon, we face a genuinely traumatic debt crisis in as little as 3 years.
It's a sobering thought.
It is. But here's the mechanism I am a little confused by. Historically, when a country's borrowing rates stay elevated, its currency strengthens right, because those high yields attract foreign capital.
Right, normally.
But the U.S. dollar actually weakened this week in response to all this bond market volatility. Why the disconnect there?
Well, we are seeing sovereign debt anxiety basically break traditional market mechanics. When a debt burden grows so large that investors begin to actually question the mathematical reality of a government ever paying it back in current terms, the high interest rate stops looking like an attractive return and it starts looking like a risk premium.
Oh, I see. Like they need to be paid more just to take on the risk of holding the debt.
Exactly. Central banks and global investors are showing signs of wavering confidence in the dollar's long-term purchasing power. And when confidence in fiat currency wavers, capital runoff flows violently into alternative assets, assets that governments cannot easily inflate or manipulate.
Okay, so that totally explains the rotation we saw on Friday. Because gold climbed to a 3-month high, which makes total sense as a classic traditional safety play.
Right.
But the much wilder story is what's playing out in the cryptocurrency markets. Bitcoin surged 22% this week, closing near $77,000.
It was a huge jump.
That is a massive, violent swing.
Yeah.
And it seems impossible that it was driven entirely by some, I don't know, sudden philosophical shift among institutional investors. Like, what was the actual mechanical driver there?
Yeah, it wasn't philosophy. The Bitcoin surge was supercharged by a mechanical market event known as a short squeeze.
Okay, like what we saw a few years ago with those meme stocks.
Very similar mechanism, yeah. So when the Treasury temporarily depressed bond yields with that initial buyback announcement, risk assets across the board caught a sudden upward bump.
Right.
And that price bump acted as a tripwire. There were traders who had placed massive bets that the price of crypto would go down. Those are your short sellers.
Yep.
Market data shows roughly $2.7 billion in these short bets were liquidated.
$2.7 billion.
Wow. And when a short seller is liquidated by their broker because a trade moves against them, the broker automatically forces them to buy the underlying asset to cover their position.
I see.
So you have $2.7 billion of forced, frantic buying hitting the market all at once. And that creates a violent self-feeding loop that forces prices exponentially higher, which is entirely divorced from the fundamental value of the asset.
And that type of concentrated volatility is terrifying for standard portfolio managers.
Yeah.
I mean, 6 top investors recently put out notes advising clients to completely change their equity strategy.
Yeah, they are getting nervous.
They are officially warning against holding too much of the same mega-cap tech stocks, and they're pointing to equal weight exposures, real estate investment trusts, and UK equities as places to hide.
Mm-hmm.
So walk me through the mechanics of an equal weight exposure. Like, why does that protect an everyday investor from the volatility of the tech sector?
So most standard index funds, like a typical S&P 500 fund, are what we call capitalization weighted.
Okay.
That means the biggest companies make up the largest percentage of the fund. And right now, a handful of massive tech companies are so gigantic that they dictate the performance of the entire index.
Right, so if Apple or NVIDIA has a bad day, the whole index drops.
Exactly. If a company like NVIDIA has a bad week, your whole retirement portfolio drops, even if the other 490 companies are doing great.
That makes sense.
So an equal weight exposure changes the math. It takes those 500 companies and invests the exact same dollar amount in every single one, regardless of their size.
Oh, okay.
So it acts as an escape valve because it dramatically reduces your exposure to that handful of tech giants that are currently locked in this wildly expensive arms race.
And that arms race is the other side of our capital tug of war. Like, governments desperately need to borrow cash, but they are competing with the only entities hungrier for capital right now, which are the tech companies building artificial intelligence infrastructure.
Yeah, the scale of the spending is incredible.
It is acting like a black hole, just sucking all the available oxygen out of the financial room.
It really is. The financial gravity of AI development is warping corporate balance sheets in real time. Just look at the fresh corporate data from Alibaba. Their net income for the June quarter just plummeted 75%.
75%. That's a massive drop.
It is. And the single driver behind that massive profit drop was their capital expenditure, which skyrocketed to $10 billion, or roughly 67.7 billion yuan.
And what are they spending $10 billion on?
That cash was vaporized primarily to buy AI chips and compute capacity. I mean, tech companies are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to build data centers before they even have a clear timeline or viable product for the return on that investment.
Speaking of digesting massive amounts of information, you can find Financial Candy, Brain Candy, and classic audiobooks at claraneratio.com. But looking at this AI spending spree, there is a fundamental physical limit that the market seems to be ignoring right now.
Oh yeah, the physical bottlenecks are huge.
Right, because you could spend $10 billion on the most advanced chips in the world, but eventually you have to actually put them somewhere. Where are they housing these servers? And more importantly, how are they powering them without melting the local electrical grids?
Well, that physical bottleneck is exactly what is triggering a major civic backlash against this whole digital boom. Anthropic, which is an AI company eyeing a potential $2 trillion valuation for its upcoming IPO, they are actively listing local pushback against data centers as a major risk factor in its prospectus.
I mean, it makes sense. I wouldn't want one of those next to my house.
Right, and you're not alone. Recent Gallup polling data reveals 70% of Americans completely oppose new data center construction in their areas.
Wow, 70%?
Yeah. These facilities require massive amounts of land, millions of gallons of water for the cooling systems, and uninterrupted gigawatts of electricity. So this puts trillion-dollar tech companies in direct conflict with local communities who are really just trying to keep their residential utility bills from skyrocketing.
And this tension has already escalated from, local zoning board meetings into a central political flashpoint. In the highly contested Ohio Senate race, candidates are actively sparring over data centers draining the local power grid.
It's becoming a major campaign issue.
It is, and it's completely reshaping how industrial capital is deployed. I was looking at hedge fund movements this week, and they are quietly taking massive positions in legacy pipeline companies like Williams.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they aren't buying these companies for traditional fossil fuel reasons. They are buying them to secure direct natural gas feeds. Tech companies are basically realizing they cannot rely on public utilities anymore.
So they're building their own power plants.
It's essentially, they are trying to build massive off-grid server farms powered directly by their own private natural gas supplies.
Wow. Well, the broader market is finally waking up to this infrastructure bottleneck. We saw a distinct sell-off in AI infrastructure stocks this week.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it actually prompted companies like Qnity Electronics, which is a major player in semiconductor materials, to abruptly swap out their chief financial officer ahead of crucial tech earnings from industry heavyweights like NVIDIA.
That's never a great sign.
No, it's not. Investors are beginning to question whether the sheer scale of AI-related investment is starting to crowd out other vital forms of capital expenditure across the broader economy.
And while the tech sector demands, infinite electrical power, the global economy is just choking on basic physical friction. Energy markets are incredibly constrained as of this week. Diesel fuel in the U.S. is closing in on record highs, averaging $5.47 a gallon nationally.
And in some places, it's much worse.
Oh, yeah. In California, it is hitting an eye-watering $7 a gallon.
Yeah.
The pain at the pump is so severe out there that it is accelerating talks about a proposed Western Gateway pipeline just to bring imported fuel from the coast into the interior.
Right.
Meanwhile, Europe is entering the fall with dangerously low natural gas storage following a really hot summer that drove up air conditioning use.
But energy isn't just about weather, right? Geopolitics is violently distorting these supply lines. Yeah, the conflict in the Middle East has completely rewired global energy flows. So the U.S. is a major exporter of liquid natural gas, and ordinarily a significant portion of that would flow directly to Europe to replenish those depleted reserves we were just talking about.
Okay.
However, market data indicates those American shipments are increasingly being diverted to Asia.
Why is that?
Well, the ongoing war involving Iran has knocked a significant portion of Qatari liquid natural gas offline. So to keep their economies running, Asian buyers are just aggressively outbidding Europe for the American energy capacity.
And the U.S. government is actively preparing to escalate that specific conflict through a mechanism that's being called an economic D-Day.
Yeah, the secondary sanctions.
Right. The Treasury Department is threatening to deploy secondary sanctions against Iran. So walk me through the mechanics of a secondary sanction, because it sounds like we are essentially telling our own allies that if they do business with Tehran, we will lock them out of the U.S. banking system entirely. That feels like a massive escalation.
It is.
How does global trade even function under those threats?
It functions with a lot of difficulty. Secondary sanctions are an exceptionally aggressive economic tool because they explicitly weaponize the U.S. dollar's status as the global reserve currency.
Okay.
Primary sanctions just stop American companies from dealing with a target. But secondary sanctions, they penalize any third-party country or foreign bank anywhere in the world that touches the U.S. dollar while facilitating a transaction with the targeted nation.
So it's basically saying if you want to use dollars, you have to play by our rules.
Exactly. The U.S. is essentially forcing its allies and economic rivals like China to make a binary choice: trade with Iran or retain access to the American financial system.
Wow.
Enforcing this requires massive intelligence resources, too, because targeted nations continually spin up new commercial fronts, shell companies, and shatter shipping vessels just to evade detection.
That's like a game of whack-a-mole. And Honestly, navigating global trade right now resembles an increasingly hostile obstacle course because it isn't just geopolitical blockades causing friction. Nature itself is cutting off the critical shortcuts.
Yeah, the Panama Canal situation is getting dire.
It really is. A severe El Nino weather pattern has triggered a massive drought in Central America. And because the canal relies on fresh water from surrounding lakes to actually operate its locks, the Panama Canal Authority is being forced to cut its daily ship transits down to 32 starting in September.
32. That's a huge drop.
It's massive. That waterway normally generates $3 billion annually for Panama. And when you strangle a primary artery of global shipping like that, ships have to route all the way around South America.
Right, which takes forever.
Exactly. It drastically increases transit times, it burns way more fuel, and ultimately it drives up the retail cost of everything sitting inside those shipping containers.
Absolutely.
And it isn't just international routes breaking down either. The UK's Royal Mail just missed its local delivery targets yet again. And this is despite a $670 million turnaround plan that was implemented specifically to modernize their logistics network.
And, all of these massive macro pressures, the incredibly expensive sovereign debt, the AI capital drain, the energy bottlenecks, and the choked shipping lanes, they all eventually pool directly at the feet of the everyday consumer.
Right.
When it costs a company more to borrow money to fund their operations and more to physically ship their goods, corporate margins shrink and retail prices remain elevated, and we are finally seeing distinct exhaustion in the consumer spending data.
Yeah, I was looking at consumer trends, and I am honestly a bit confused by the data coming out of PopMart.
Oh, the toy maker.
Right, they are the massively popular Chinese toy maker responsible for the current Labubu craze. These figures are incredibly viral. You see them literally everywhere online.
Yeah, they're huge right now.
Yet their shares dropped over 4% in Hong Kong on Friday. They reported a 16.5% drop in revenue across the Americas and a nearly 10% drop in the Asia-Pacific region outside of China. So if people are suddenly refusing to buy even this hottest, most viral discretionary consumer goods out there, what does that actually signal about the reality of the consumer wallet?
It signals that the American consumer balance sheet is reaching a real breaking point. Americans are currently holding $1.26 trillion in credit card debt.
1.26 trillion.
Yeah, which is hovering near an all-time high. And the aggregate number is alarming, sure, but what makes that figure truly toxic is the cost of carrying it.
Because of the high interest rates.
Exactly. The average interest rate on credit cards currently carrying a balance sits above 22%.
Wow, over 22%.
Yeah, and this crushing interest burden is driving a massive peak in debt consolidation strategies right now. A borrower with a decent credit score can take out a personal loan at roughly 12.43% to completely pay off those 22% credit cards.
Okay, so they're basically swapping out the high interest debt for lower interest debt.
Right. And the math works beautifully on a spreadsheet. It instantly saves thousands in interest payments. But it requires a massive behavioral shift that most consumers honestly fail to make.
Right, because if a borrower consolidates the debt but then leaves the original credit cards open and just continues to use them for everyday expenses, they end up completely financially trapped.
Yep, they dig a deeper hole.
They're suddenly forced to carry both the new loan payment and the brand new high-interest card balances simultaneously.
It's a disaster.
And to ease this intense consumer pain ahead of upcoming elections, governments are resorting to some bizarre microeconomic interventions. Like the U.S. government just announced an executive order allowing 300,000 metric tons of ground beef to be imported tariff-free over the next 3 months.
Right.
The stated goal is to artificially drop grocery store beef prices by 25%. Now, as someone whose grocery bill has been fairly brutal lately, cheaper beef at the counter sounds like a huge win. So where is the catch?
The catch is the mechanical destruction of the domestic supply chain.
Okay, how so?
Well, market economists and agricultural experts are highly skeptical of this intervention because of the math facing American ranchers. The U.S. cattle herd is currently at its lowest size since the 1950s.
Wait, the 1950s?
Yeah, and that follows years of severe drought and high feed costs that really forced ranchers into herd liquidation just to survive.
Oh, I see.
So allowing a flood of cheap, tariff-free imported beef into the market drives down live cattle prices immediately.
Right.
And while that provides a nice short-term band-aid for consumers at the meat counter today, it actively punishes the domestic ranchers who are already struggling.
Because they can't compete with the cheap imports.
Exactly. It disincentivizes them from expanding their herds, which guarantees massive long-term supply shortages and even more severe price spikes a year or two from now.
And that selective removal of tariffs on beef sits in sharp contrast with the ticking clock on other major trade barriers. Because as of Friday evening, U.S. and Canadian trade negotiators are locked in a room in Washington facing a midnight deadline.
Oh yeah, the auto tariffs.
Yeah. If they fail to reach an agreement tonight, the U.S. will automatically implement a 50% tariff on Canadian aluminum and a 25% tariff on Canadian autos.
Wow.
And the leverage being traded in these final hours reportedly involves the U.S. attempting to force Canada to open its highly protected dairy market and also restore access for American alcohol sales.
And it's wild because these policy mandates and tariffs, they're forcing really expensive capital changes across every single layer of the economy, right down to the neighborhood level.
What do you mean by the neighborhood level?
Well, look at local noise ordinances and emissions bans across the U.S. They are forcing independent landscape gardeners to completely overhaul their equipment.
Oh, like the gas leaf blowers.
Exactly. A sole proprietor operating a single landscaping truck is now being forced to spend upwards of $10,000 to swap out traditional gas leaf blowers for high-tech aerospace-grade electric blowers.
$10,000.
Yeah.
Just for leaf blowers.
Yeah. Companies like Wister Aero and legacy brands like Stihl are literally taking advanced fan technology designed for electric aircraft and retrofitting it into backpack blowers for residential lawn care.
That is wild. But while the aerospace technology makes the tools, significantly quieter for the neighborhoods, the physical logistics required to operate them are incredibly burdensome for the workers.
Yeah, it's a huge pain for them.
Because the electric batteries on these high-end blowers only last about 15 to 30 minutes at full throttle.
Right.
That means a standard landscaping crew needs to constantly cycle, store, and charge a half dozen heavy batteries throughout a single shift just to do the exact same amount of work they did last year.
It's wildly inefficient.
It is a perfect micro example of the macro environment we're in. We want the clean, quiet, technologically advanced outcome, but the upfront capital cost and the physical infrastructure required to support it are just immense.
And that friction really brings us right back to the core pattern of Friday's market data. We are watching a violent collision between infinite financial demands and finite physical realities.
Right.
Governments want to borrow infinite amounts of money to fund their deficits. Tech companies want infinite capital and electricity to build artificial intelligence. Consumers want infinite access to affordable discretionary goods.
But they can't all have it.
No, they are all colliding with the finite reality of strained electrical grids, drought-stricken canal water levels, depleted cattle herds, and a global bond market that is finally demanding a higher risk premium.
So in a market where sovereign governments and trillion-dollar technology conglomerates are corrosively pulling on the rope, just fighting over every available dollar of capital and every megawatt of infrastructure,
Right.
The most important action an individual listener can take is to ruthlessly protect their own side of the tug of war.
Absolutely. Maintaining personal liquidity and minimizing your exposure to high-interest consumer debt is not just a conservative financial planning strategy right now. It is the absolute most effective way to insulate your household cash flow from the structural friction we are seeing across the global supply chain.
Well said. That is Financial Candy for Friday. We will be back on Monday. If you need something to listen to while you navigate the weekend, be sure to check out Sunday Candy. I'll leave you with this. If the rope in this great capital tug of war finally snaps under the weight of $40 trillion in debt and a $2 trillion AI arms race, who do you think is going to hit the mud first?